from Lystra to Iconium and then Antioch. And there they preach and teach to the people that with many persecutions they have to enter God's kingdom. They restart their journey from Antioch. They go to Perga, Pamphylia, and then Pisidia. Then they come to Antioch again. And there they establish, practically in Antioch, they were all called Christians for the first time. Antioch was the center. As I was going through this particular reading, the first reading, I am reminded of my previous parish where we had a group of people, 300 to 400 people. That particular group was named as Jesus Christ Light of the World. And what they were doing, every 3 months, 25 members would go to the northern part of India to proclaim the good news. You know, they would have the Bible study, they would learn the Bible, they sit together, they reflect on the biblical passages, and they would go to the northern part of India, to villages, to the places where there was no indication or preaching of the gospel. And after 20-25 days, they would come back to the parish and they will share the same experience with other parishioners, with that particular group in a very special way. And next time they would choose another few people with their coordinators and leaders. They would go to another part of my country, that is India. Recently I came to know from a preacher who was not very satisfied with the spread of Christianity. You know, that person was from a different religion. And that person was saying that, what about South Korea? You know, I was stunned to see that stretch of the airport road leading to the city, 15 kilometers, every 10 meters there is a church. Practically every 10 meters there is a church. So I was surprised. Maybe that person was not very satisfied, and that person was saying that we too must do the same thing in our country for our religion. But then, dear friends, we are not in competition of building churches and building churches. What is important to find out? When we look at the life of Jesus, what was he doing? There was a kind of group, the 12 disciples, 12 apostles and the disciples. They were going from place to place. At the beginning of his ministry, he was always going to the synagogue to preach and teach. And later, he chose the Sea of Galilee. He chose the deserted places, the mountainous regions, maybe a secluded, lonely place. He called his disciples. People would gather. And what was that? Jesus was practically a synagogue himself. He was going everywhere with the synagogue. In the Old Testament and during the time of Jesus, people had to go to the synagogue. But here Jesus, as the mobile synagogue, he was going to the people. And that is what we find in the first reading. These disciples who were filled with the Holy Spirit and power of God were not afraid of the different cultures and traditions. They sowed the seed of the gospel where there was no indication earlier about Jesus Christ. They preached Jesus Christ resurrected. The second reading, here John is the seer. You know, the book of Revelation is a very interesting book. Sometimes we need to read, we can read it like a novel. You know, it's a beautiful passage, or the whole book. It contains 22 chapters. The division of the book is very interesting. The first part, John sees a vision and then he is asked to write letters to the 7 churches. And then he speaks about the Lamb and God on the throne and breaking of the 7 seals, the punishment of Babylon and other nations who do not believe. And finally, we have this part of the reading. The last part, practically 22 chapters, we take this reading from 21st chapter. John is saying that I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and first earth had disappeared, and the sea was no more. Why sea was no more? Why? Because in the Old Testament, as well as in the old cultures like Babylonian culture and Egyptian culture, they had a great fear of the sea. They were saying that in the sea there would be great monsters. And whenever they wanted to travel by sea, they would always go through the shore of the sea, not in the middle of the sea. Today we have these huge cruise lines, They have no problem of traveling in the middle of the sea. But in the past, they were traveling because of the fear that there would be great monsters. And one of the monsters, or the chaotic monster which is called Tiamat, believed by the Babylonians, was hiding and creating all kinds of disasters, floods. And the Egyptians also believed that the sea monsters have swallowed the river Nile. So they had all this kind of understanding in the past. And consequently, John may be having an indication of that, and he says, the sea was no more. Sea disappeared. And what is this new creation? The new creation is the gospel of Christ, who came into this world to dwell among people. That's why when we go back to the Old Testament, we have many indications that God had promised in the past that He would come and dwell with the people. Now we can just imagine in Canada, how far we are in love with our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or the previous Prime Minister Harper. It all depends on people who have voted for him. Now just imagine he comes to downtown Vancouver. What will happen? Those people, at least who have voted for him, they would go and would like to have a touch with him or a photograph with him. They would be so mad after at least have a vision of him. And why? He's the leader. He's the Prime Minister. He has come here. The same thing happens with President Obama, the great leaders. But just imagine God coming and dwelling amidst us. What would be the great joy? There would be that celebration. That's why in the Old Testament, the book of Leviticus chapter 26 verse 11 to 12, God said, I will walk with my people and I will be with them. And then we have Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 33, he says, they shall be my people and I shall be their God. I will walk with them. And then Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 27 very clearly says, I will lead my flock. They are my people and I will live with them. And that's what we hear in the second reading today. I will be with them and I will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will not be any more pain. There will not be any death. And I will create everything new. This is connected with the gospel passage. When Jesus was celebrating the Last Supper, what did He give? He gave us the most beautiful commandment ever a person can give. He did not refer to the Old Testament, you have to follow the 10 commandments. I give you a new commandment. And what is that new commandment? Commandment of love. And what is that commandment of love? You should love one another as I have loved you. That is it. The concrete expression of Jesus is, don't think about the Old Testament, don't think about the 10 commandments. You just love as I have loved you. Now what parent can tell to their children, my child, you must love as I have loved you? Can they tell that to the children? That would be a marvelous change in the family. The children will look at it. Oh, Daddy, you are scolding me. Is it the way to love you? My child, you must love me as I have loved you. What is that? I have been generous to you. I have been kind to you. I have forgiven you. I have embraced you. I have taken care of you. I have spent time with you. Jesus did the same thing. At the Last Supper, as the conclusion of His entire ministry, what did He do? He washed the feet of His disciples. And He said, I am the master and teacher. but I wash your feet. And you must learn from me, and you must do the same to one another. That is the essence of Christian love. Love and service. Service and love. And that's why Jesus' greatest commandment at the Last Supper, you must love one another as I have loved you. And that's why Jesus says, the Son of Man is glorified. How he is glorified? He is glorified through love. I was just explaining to the first communicants today, this morning, at 9 a.m. We had this grand celebration. I told the little children, you must know how to love and love your parents. And parents, you must know how to love your children. Do not impose your ideologies on your children. Come to the level of the children. And I said, unless you become like little children, you won't be able to enter God's kingdom. And becoming little children is learning to love. Children are so loving and lovable. Parents must learn it from the children, and children must learn from the parents. And that should reflect in every way in our daily lives, wherever we may be. It could be in our community, in our parish, at home, in our neighborhood, in the place of work, wherever we may be. That is the commandment, dear friends, that distinguishes us from others. Love. And love, the ingredients of love are great. There comes also patience, no jealousy, kindness, compassion, forgiveness. All these ingredients are put together, and Jesus loved his disciples. Dear friends, long back, I do not know whether I have narrated this particular incident that happened in 1921 to 1937. Have you heard of this prison in New York, which is called Sing Sing prison? Have you heard of it? Sing Sing prison. It is said that during that time it was the notorious prison, and notorious criminals were imprisoned there. And in 1921, Mr. Chauvin was appointed as the warden. Was a nice guy, and he had his wife Catherine. And many had warned Catherine that she should never approach this prison. Warden has his job, but she should never ever think of entering the prison. But then Catherine was a quite different woman, deeply Christian, and she said, well, if you say so, I have only one commandment that I have learned from Christ. That is loving. If I love them, they will love me. I am not afraid. And after being appointed the warden of this prison, after some time, there was a basketball match happening within the prison. And Catherine said, I should go and watch this game with my 3 little children. Can you imagine? That was the great courageous step she took. And with the permission from her husband, the warden, she entered with the 3 children. And from then onwards, her ministry of love began in that particular prison. They were not harmful, they were kind, understanding, and she taught those people who were blind in the prison to read. She learned the sign language to make the people who were deaf and dumb. She was kind to those people who were physically challenged, because there's all sorts of people were there in the prison. And one day, what happened? This wonderful woman met with a car accident and died. And the news reached the prison. And the warden did not come that day. The assistant warden was there. As he came back from his early morning walk, he could see all these prisoners huddled together at the main gate of the prison looking out. And when he approached, he could see all these prisoners were sad and shedding tears. The assistant warden said, guys, I understand you. Your great hero died. Now what I am going to do, I am going to open the gates of this prison. And Catherine was living 3/4 of a mile away from the prison. I am leaving you out today, But I must see each and every one of you must check in by tonight. And all of these prisoners made a long procession to the home of Catherine to pay her tribute. And each and every prisoner made it back faithfully to the prison at night. What do we understand, dear friends? The power of love. The power of love that can transform even a notorious prison into a home of love. That is what we are called to do. Dear friends, love is not in the air. Love is not in the words. We can utter many words and poems, but love in action. And ultimately, it comes to service of one another. That's why serving one another, we show that we love one another. And ultimately, it is the commandment Jesus gives to his disciples over and over again. And at the Last Supper, in a very special way, today's gospel passage, you must love one another as I have loved you. And if you love one another as I have loved you, you will show to the world that you are my disciples. Kindly let's be professed.